was a peaceful morning when a young man, who had always been restless, woke up feeling an inexplicable emptiness. Although he had everything most people desire, a good family, friends, and a promising future, something deep and indescribable tormented him. It was as if behind every smile there was a shadow he couldn't dispel. The things that once brought him joy now seemed mundane, lifeless, and purposeless. It was as if the world around him was losing its colors, turning grayer with each passing day. One day, as he sat by a calm lake, he gazed at the still waters and wondered, is this it? Is life just an endless sequence of days that pass without us understanding why we are here? This thought deeply disturbed him, and he realized he could no longer ignore this internal unrest. Then something changed. In his heart, a new determination arose, a force driving him to seek answers, to understand what was missing in his life. He knew that to find these answers, he would need to step away from what was familiar and comfortable. He felt compelled to leave, to embark on a journey of self-discovery, one that would take him beyond the boundaries of the known into the heart of what truly matters. With this decision made, he packed a few belongings, said goodbye to his parents and friends, and set off into the unknown. He wasn't sure where to go, but he had one certainty. He needed to find something or someone who could help him understand this void, to fill the space that was consuming him from within. His journey led him through distant villages, silent forests, and towering mountains. Each step brought him closer to a destination he couldn't yet clearly see, but one he somehow felt was waiting for him. In his heart was a mix of fear and hope, a silent expectation that his uncertain quest would lead him to something grand, something that would change his life forever. And so, with eyes on the horizon and a heart full of questions, the young man walked. Each day, he moved further away from the world he knew and closer to an encounter that, though he didn't yet realize it, was about to change his life. After days of walking unknown roads, the young man arrived at a hidden valley nestled between majestic mountains. There, amidst the untouched nature, he spotted an ancient monastery with stone walls covered in moss, as if time had stopped in that place. A strange feeling enveloped him as he saw the monastery, a sense that he had finally found what he had been seeking, even though he didn't yet know exactly what it was. As he passed through the wooden gate, which creaked softly as it opened, he was greeted by a profound peace, a silence that seemed to hold all the answers he was searching for. He wandered through the courtyard, observing monks in meditation, their faces serene and oblivious to the outside world. The young man felt a mix of reverence and humility, as if he were in a sacred place where everything had a purpose he was yet to understand. As he walked, lost in thought, he was interrupted by a calm and wise voice. "You seem to have come from far away, young man. What has brought you here?" Turning around, he saw a monk with a simple appearance, but a presence that exuded both authority and tranquility. The monk's deep eyes, like the ocean, reflected an understanding the young man had never encountered before. The young man, still struggling to find his voice, managed to murmur, "I'm searching for answers to understand why I feel this emptiness, this restlessness that won't leave me in peace." The monk looked at him with a mix of compassion and recognition, as if he already knew what the young man was going through. We all feel this call at some point. What you are feeling is the beginning of a much larger journey. And this journey begins with understanding the four noble truths, dukkha, samuddaya, nirodha, and magga, the teaching that Buddha himself shared to illuminate humanity's path. Intrigued and eager, the young man asked, "What are these truths, Master? How can they help me understand what I'm feeling?" The monk smiled faintly and, pointing to a stone bench under an ancient tree, invited the young man to sit beside him. "Before I speak of the truths, it's important that you understand they are not just concepts to be learned. They are mirrors that show us the reality of life, no matter how harsh it may seem." The young man, his eyes fixed on the monk, listened intently as he began to explain the first of the four noble truths. As the monk spoke, the young man began to realize that he was about to embark on a journey of self-discovery that would far exceed his expectations. a journey that would reveal not only the cause of his suffering, but also the path to his liberation. The atmosphere around them seemed to transform as the monk began to weave Buddhist teachings into a narrative that deeply touched the young man's heart. At that moment, he knew his life would never be the same. As the monk continued to speak, the young man felt a heaviness in the air, as if what he was about to hear would be both a revelation and a challenge. The monk, in his serene tone, began. The first noble truth is the acceptance that suffering is an inescapable part of life. Pain, loss, disappointment, all these feelings you carry are intrinsic to the human experience. The young man furrowed his brow, trying to grasp the depth of these words. But why? Why do we have to suffer? Shouldn't there be a way to avoid this? The monk nodded as if he had expected this question. Imagine life as a turbulent river, full of unexpected currents. Every time we try to resist the natural flow, we hurt ourselves. The loss of a loved one, the end of a relationship, the failure of our goals. These are like the stones at the bottom of that river. When we cling to the idea that life should be perfect and painless, we hurt ourselves even more because reality never matches that expectation. The young man recalled specific moments in his life: the loss of a close friend, the frustration of unfulfilled dreams, the pain of watching his parents grow older. He had always tried to escape these realities by distracting himself with worldly things, but now he realized that all he had done was delay the inevitable. Each wound, no matter how much he tried to ignore it, still pulsed beneath the surface. Suffering, the monk continued, is not just in the great tragedies but also in the daily disappointments. From physical discomfort to emotional anguish, it manifests in various forms, and most of us spend our entire lives trying to escape it, not realizing that this escape only increases the pain. The young man lowered his head, feeling a mix of sadness and understanding. So, should we just accept that life is suffering? It's not about passive acceptance, the monk replied with a lightness that surprised the young man. It's about recognizing this truth so that we can understand our nature and, from there, find a path to true peace. Pain is part of the journey, but it is not the end. Suffering is, in fact, a disguised teacher, showing us how to look within ourselves and question our illusions. The young man remembered when he lost a job he loved. At the time, he felt devastated, as if his entire worth was tied to that job. Now, listening to the monk's words, he began to see that experience in a new light. The suffering he felt did not come only from the loss itself, but from his attachment to what he thought defined him. He realized that this attachment to external things always led him back to a cycle of pain, like a tide that never recedes. So, suffering is inevitable, the young man murmured, more to himself than to the monk. Yes, the monk said with a serenity that seemed to hold an ocean of lived experiences. But it is the first step towards something greater. By understanding that suffering exists and is universal, you begin to walk the path of true wisdom. And this wisdom will guide you beyond suffering. The young man looked at the monk, feeling for the first time a strange sense of relief, as if accepting suffering was the beginning of a liberation he didn't yet fully understand. The journey was just beginning, but now, with the monk's words resonating in his mind, he felt he was approaching something profound, something that might finally fill the void that had brought him there. Now more aware of the reality of suffering, the young man was eager to understand the next truth. The monk, noticing the restlessness in his eyes, began to speak with deep calm, as if each word was carefully chosen to penetrate the heart of his disciple. The second noble truth, said the monk, is that suffering has a cause, and that cause is rooted in desire, in the attachment we have to things, to people, and even to our own ideas. It is desire that traps us in an endless wheel of pain and dissatisfaction. The young man tilted his head, trying to process this idea. But isn't desire natural? Isn't it wrong to want to be happy, to have things that make us feel good? The monk smiled lightly, recognizing the young man's confusion. Yes, desire is natural, but within its nature also lies the danger. When we desire something, we create an expectation, an image of how things should be. And when reality doesn't match that image, suffering arises. We want things to remain the same, for pleasure to last forever, for love to never change. But life is impermanent. Everything is in constant transformation. And it is in this attachment to what is transient that suffering takes root. The young man remembered a time when he fell deeply in love. He clung to that person as if his own happiness depended on her. At first, everything seemed perfect, but as time passed and things changed, he began to feel a growing anguish. The fear of losing that person, the desire for things to never change. All of this consumed him until the relationship ended, leaving him devastated. The monk continued, observing the emotions passing across the young man's face. Desire is like holding sand in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. And in the end, you're left with emptiness, with empty hands and a heavy heart. Desire binds us to an endless cycle of always wanting more, never being satisfied with what we have, always looking outside ourselves for something that, in truth, can only be found within. The young man took a deep breath, feeling the weight of these words. He realized that throughout his life, he had chased after things he believed would make him happy: success, love, recognition. But instead, each achievement seemed only to increase his dissatisfaction, like a thirst that could never be quenched. So how can we free ourselves from this cycle? The young man asked, the urgency in his voice reflecting his desire to find a way out. The monk looked at him with a kindness that seemed to envelop all his pain. The answer is not in avoiding desire, but in understanding it, in seeing through it. When we realize that desire is just a shadow, an illusion we project onto the world, we begin to loosen our bonds. It's about recognizing that nothing external can give us the lasting happiness we seek. Everything we need is already within us, waiting to be discovered. The young man felt a wave of emotion, a mix of sadness for the time lost and hope for what was still to come. He began to understand that his external search for satisfaction would always lead him back to the starting point, to a void that could never be filled by material things or people. True peace, true freedom, could only be found by letting go, by detaching. The monk concluded, looking deeply into the young man's eyes. Understand desire, and you will understand the root of suffering. Learn to let go, and you will begin to free yourself. This is the path to the cessation of pain, and it is where your journey must continue. The young man nodded, feeling a new sense of clarity growing within him. The journey was far from over, but he knew that with each truth revealed, he was one step closer to finding the peace he so desperately sought. The young man was deep in thought, reflecting on everything the monk had taught him so far. The reality of suffering and its origin in desire left him with a mix of restlessness and hope. He knew he needed answers to the questions that now consumed him. If suffering is inevitable and its root lies in desire, is there a way to free oneself from this pain that seems to be everywhere? The monk, sensing the young man's internal agitation, spoke with a tranquility that seemed to calm the waves of his thoughts. We have now reached the third noble truth, perhaps the most important of all, the truth of the cessation of suffering. And that truth is that yes, there is a way to free ourselves from the pain and dissatisfaction that afflict our lives. The young man's eyes widened, filled with both expectation and a touch of disbelief. How is that possible? If desire is in everything, how can we simply stop suffering? The monk smiled gently, a smile that seemed to carry the wisdom of countless lives. It is possible when we realize that suffering is not an inevitable destiny, but a choice we make, often unconsciously, by clinging to what is transient. The cessation of suffering occurs when we abandon attachment and find peace in impermanence. It is like the sky clearing after a storm. Suffering dissipates when we stop fighting against the nature of things. The young man thought about his own struggles, about how he had always clung to ideals, people, and moments, trying to eternalize what by its very nature was fleeting. He recalled losing a dear friend in an accident. The pain of the loss consumed him for months, as if part of him had been torn away. He clung to memories, to the moments shared, desperately wishing he could turn back time. But now, Hearing the monk's words, he began to understand that part of his suffering came precisely from this resistance, from his refusal to accept the reality of change and loss. Peace, continued the monk, does not come from having everything we desire, but from understanding that we do not need to cling to anything. True relief comes when we let go, when we allow things to follow their natural course. It is at that moment that we find freedom, a freedom that does not depend on external circumstances, but on our own inner attitude. The young man felt a lump in his throat, a mix of emotions he didn't know how to express. It was as if an invisible door had opened within him, showing him a path he had never noticed before. A path beyond pain, beyond incessant desire. He began to realize that, as difficult as it was, there was a beauty in acceptance, a lightness in letting things follow their natural course. But how do we do that? He asked in a voice almost whispering. How do we let go of what we value so much, what we think defines us? The monk looked at him with a depth that seemed to touch his soul. It begins with the understanding that everything you hold so tightly is ultimately an illusion. What truly matters, what is truly eternal, cannot be touched by loss or change. It is inner peace, the state of non-attachment, that you must cultivate. And this does not mean that you should isolate yourself from the world, but rather that you should participate in it without being imprisoned by it. For the first time in a long while, the young man felt an inner peace begin to emerge, like a calm lake after a storm. He knew that the path would not be easy, that letting go of attachment would require more than mere intellectual understanding, but he was ready to accept impermanence, ready to find peace within himself where no suffering could reach him. The monk, seeing the transformation in the young man's eyes, simply nodded, as if he knew the seed of understanding had been planted. And so, the young man's journey continued, each step lighter than the last, each day bringing him closer to true freedom. With his mind now clearer and his heart lighter, the young man felt ready to hear what the monk had to say next. The truths he had learned so far were like a light illuminating the darkest corners of his soul. But there was still one question lingering in the air, one he knew needed to be answered before he could move forward. If I know that suffering can end, began the young man, how can I walk that path? How can I truly free myself? The monk, with the same patience as always, nodded and began to explain the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. This path, he said, is known as the Noble Eightfold Path. It is not a physical road you must travel, but a set of practices and understandings that, when followed, transform your life into a journey of wisdom and compassion. The young man listened intently, each word of the monk sounding like a key unlocking a door within him. The path begins with right view, the monk continued. It is the understanding of the Four Noble Truths, the recognition that suffering exists, that it has a cause, that it can cease, and that there is a path to this cessation. It is the foundation upon which everything else is built. He paused, allowing the young man to absorb what had been said before continuing. Next comes right intention. Your thoughts and motivations must align with the understanding that the liberation from suffering is possible. This means cultivating intentions of renunciation, goodwill, and nonviolence. It's about directing your mind towards the good, towards what will bring true peace, both for yourself and for others. The young man began to see how these practices could be applied in his own life, in the choices he made every day, in the small actions that once seemed insignificant, but that he now saw as fundamental. The path, the monk continued, also includes right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Your words should be truthful and compassionate, your actions just and beneficial, and your way of living harmonious, avoiding causing suffering to yourself or others. Every word you utter, every action you take, has the power to bring more light or more darkness into the world. The young man thought of the times when he had spoken without thinking, hurting those he loved, or the choices he had made out of convenience without considering the consequences for others. He realized that to follow this path, he would need to change not only his thoughts but his entire behavior, his daily actions. Right effort, Right mindfulness and right concentration complete the path, said the monk. Right effort is the energy you put into your spiritual growth, in avoiding evil and cultivating good. Right mindfulness is being present in every moment, aware of your thoughts, feelings, and actions, without being carried away by distractions or illusions. And right concentration is the focus of the mind, deep meditation that brings clarity and tranquility, allowing you to see reality as it truly is. The young man felt a wave of understanding wash over him. It was not an easy path, but it was a path he could walk step by step, day by day. He saw that each part of the Noble Eightfold Path was interconnected, like the threads of a web that together formed a network of support and security. With each practice, he knew he would come closer to liberation, closer to the inner peace he so desperately sought. The monk looked at the young man, seeing the determination in his eyes. Remember, he said gently, that this path is not a race but a journey. Every step you take, no matter how small it may seem, is an advance toward freedom. And at the end of this path, you will find not only the cessation of suffering, but also a deep joy, a peace that no external circumstance can shake. The young man nodded, feeling a new strength grow within him. He knew the path would be long, that there would be challenges and moments of doubt, but he also knew that with each step, he would be closer to liberation, closer to understanding himself and the world around him. And with this conviction, he decided to follow the path with an open heart and focused mind, ready to walk the road that would lead him to true freedom. With the Noble Eightfold Path in mind, the young man said goodbye to the monk and returned to the world he had left behind. But now he was no longer the same. He carried with him a new perspective, an internal compass that would guide him through life's ups and downs. However, he knew that the true test of his learning was about to begin, because understanding the truths was one thing, but applying them in the chaos of daily life, that was something entirely different. Soon after returning home, the young man was confronted with the challenges he had left unresolved. There were unresolved family conflicts, friends who had drifted apart, and responsibilities waiting for him with relentless urgency. The first major test came when he discovered that his sister was in a difficult situation, trapped in a toxic relationship that was consuming her emotionally. The young man felt a wave of anger and helplessness rise within him. His initial instinct was to confront his sister's partner, demand justice, do something to protect her. But then he remembered the monk's words about right intention and right action. He knew that acting out of anger would only bring more suffering to everyone involved. So he took a deep breath and decided to act differently. Instead of confronting the problem with aggression, he chose compassion. He talked to his sister, not with judgment, but with understanding and support. He helped her see that, like him, she too had choices. And gradually, with patience and love, he helped her find the strength within herself to make the necessary decisions. But the universe didn't stop there. At work, he faced an unexpected crisis. An important project he was leading began to fall apart due to unforeseen failures. In the past, he would have been consumed by stress, blamed others, or even himself, entering a cycle of self-judgment and frustration. But now, with right view and mindfulness, he approached the situation with clarity and calm. Instead of focusing on what went wrong, he gathered his team, discussed the lessons learned, and together they sought solutions. He realized that failure was not the end, but an opportunity to grow and learn. Even so, there were days when the young man felt overwhelmed, when the path seemed difficult to follow. There were moments of doubt, when he wondered if he was really on the right track. But whenever these thoughts arose, he remembered right concentration and right effort. He dedicated himself to meditation, returned his attention to the present moment, and found the inner strength to keep going. And so, step by step, the young man began to notice profound changes in his life. Where there had once been anxiety, there was now peace. Where there had been conflict, there was now understanding. And where there had been suffering, there was now a serene acceptance of life as it is, with all its ups and downs. He was no longer trapped in the incessant desire for control or the resistance to inevitable changes. He was learning to flow with life, to walk lightly, to be a living example that suffering can indeed be transformed. But perhaps the greatest test of all came from within. On a silent night, after a long day of challenges, he sat down to meditate. As he entered a state of deep concentration, he felt something new, a peace so vastly different from anything he had ever experienced, a peace that seemed to come from a place beyond himself. In that moment, he realized that it wasn't just the absence of suffering that he had found, but something much deeper, a connection to the true nature of his existence, a direct experience of the inner freedom that the Four Noble Truths promised. And in that silence, in that depth, the young man understood that the path he had walked was not just a means to avoid suffering, but a journey to discover true happiness, a happiness that did not depend on external circumstances, but that flowed endlessly from within his own being. As time passed, the young man began to realize that something profound had changed within him. The journey that had begun as a search for answers and an escape from suffering had transformed into something much greater, a discovery of who he truly was, beyond circumstances, beyond the fleeting pains and joys of life. He felt that he was no longer the restless and lost young man who had left home in search of wisdom. He now carried with him a tranquility that was not shaken by life's storms, a clarity that illuminated even the darkest moments. The change did not go unnoticed. Those around him began to notice the serenity in his gaze, the firmness in his words, the kindness in his actions. Friends and family who had once seen him as ordinary began to seek his advice, to ask for his opinion, as if he had become an anchor amid life's uncertainties. And he, with the humility that came from a deep understanding of the Noble Eightfold Path, offered what he could, not magical solutions, but a perspective, a way of seeing the world that he had learned along his journey. One day, while sitting under the tree where he often meditated, an old friend approached. He was troubled, trapped in a dilemma that seemed to have no way out. The young man listened attentively, letting him vent without interruption. When the friend finished, he looked at the young man, expecting an immediate solution, something that could ease his pain. But the young man, with a serene smile, responded differently than his friend expected. I remember when I was lost myself, desperately searching for answers outside of me. But I learned that what we seek is already within us. The suffering you feel does not come only from external circumstances, but from how you cling to them, from how you lose yourself in the desire for things to be different from what they are. The friend, initially confused, began to reflect on these words. The young man continued, I know it seems difficult now, but try to see this situation as part of your journey, not as an insurmountable obstacle. What you are facing is an opportunity to grow, to learn to let go of what cannot be controlled, and to find peace even in the midst of the storm. Over time, the friend returned several times, always seeking that quiet wisdom the young man seemed to offer so naturally. And it wasn't just him. Others, hearing of the young man's transformation, began to seek his company, not for quick answers, but for a presence that brought them calm and clarity. He became, without even realizing it, a sort of guide for those trapped in the cycle of suffering, someone who radiated the peace that many desperately sought. But despite all this external transformation, the greatest gift was happening within the young man. He began to understand that true freedom was not something he needed to conquer or find, but something that had always been there, just waiting to be revealed. It was as if the layers of illusion that had covered his heart had finally been removed, allowing him to see the world with crystal clear clarity. He realized that the peace he felt did not depend on anything outside of himself. It was rooted in the understanding of the Four Noble Truths and the constant practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. Every breath, every step was an expression of that peace. He no longer needed to flee from suffering, for he had learned to embrace it, to understand it, and in doing so, he dissolved it into its essence. And so life continued, with its ups and downs. But the young man, now a man with the wisdom of someone who had seen beyond appearances, walked through this world with lightness. He did not seek recognition, did not desire anything beyond what life offered him in the present moment. And this acceptance, this openness to what is made him a truly free being. People who encountered him, even briefly, felt that there was something different about him. It wasn't something they could identify with words, but a feeling, a presence that left a mark on their hearts. And so, without seeking, without desiring, the young man, now transformed into a wise man in his own journey, became a light for those still lost in the darkness. And as the sun set, he sat under the same tree where he had meditated so many times, feeling the gentle breeze on his face, knowing in his heart that he had found true liberation. And this peace, this deep understanding of life, was the greatest gift he could have received. And now he shared it with the world, not with grand words, but with the simple and powerful truth of his being. Thanks for watching. Here we come to the end of this story based on Buddha's teachings to help us know the Four Noble Truths. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. Share with your friends and leave your comments below about what you thought of this Buddha story. We always bring inspiring stories with teachings from modern life.